I want to start with a question that lies at the beating heart of Southern Gothic lore. What happens when your death overshadows your life? What happens when the means, the manner, the cause, or even the circumstances of your passing lead to far more notoriety than anything you accomplished during your time on Earth? This is a question that fuels folklore from around the world. Nearly every good ghost story or haint tale begins with a simple person living a simple life. When they die, that's when things get complicated. Welcome to Haunts and Hollows, True Tales of the Gothic South. I'm your host, mystery author Liam Ash. Tonight we will take a look at 5 women who lived fairly ordinary lives. In death, however, they became indelible figures in traditional Southern Gothic folklore. This episode is sponsored by my friends at Arcanoctus. They encourage you to unlock your curiosity with their collection of the odd, the unusual, and the obscure. In my travels around the South, I've encountered dozens, if not hundreds, of local tales that start with a tragic or violent death and end with a ghostly haunting. Have you ever been to Savannah or Charleston or St. Augustine, for example? The ghost lore of each of these southern towns is built on a firm foundation of a spectral life after death, and curiously, most of the tales involve women who met an unfortunate end. In Georgia, you've got Matilda Sorrell, Honoria Foley, and Little Gracie Watson. South Carolina has notorious serial killer Lavinia Fisher, Zoe Saint-Amand, and the pirate Anne Bonny. And in Florida's oldest city, you may encounter Dolores Martis, the tragic Pity Sisters, or even their unnamed spectral playmate. In this episode, I want to look at the lives, deaths, and after-deaths of my favorites. And not just the ghost stories, but the true tales that hide behind them. Some of these you may already know, some you may not. But these 5, and they include, a Florida housewife, a melancholy college student, a witch queen, and a vengeful murder victim, these are my favorites. We usually think of ghosts as spirits returning from a far distant era. The women are usually dressed in all white or all black, and their clothing reflects the earlier age in which they lived and died. So who says that all ghosts have to be corseted with bustles and gloves and veils? This first tale involves a spirit that hails not from the 1890s, but from the 1990s. In 1918, Nellie VanZant was born in Florida's Nassau County. The first 25 years of her life were, and this is by all accounts, thoroughly uneventful. At the age of 25, she met and soon tied the knot with Knud Howard Olford, a Danish immigrant from up north. In 1954, Nellie, who is now Nellie Olford, and her husband opened the Riverside Motel right off the Florida-Georgia line. Soon, the motel was a bustling stop for travelers along U.S. Highway 17. It certainly didn't hurt that the Olfords' adjacent liquor store and lounge offered a little taste of paradise for thirsty Georgians who needed a stiff drink on dry days. When Interstate 95 bled the tourist traffic off older byways like 17, the demand for rooms at places like the Riverside just dried up. And even worse, liquor laws changed, which made crossing state lines unnecessary. Now, the Olfords soldiered on until January 3rd, 1993, and that's when Nellie and her car were first reported missing. Husband Knud seemed unbothered by her disappearance. He claimed she simply drove off and never came back. Then he stopped answering questions. Then he refused requests to search the property for clues to her whereabouts. Without his assistance, police were left empty-handed. Nellie Olford was thought to have simply vanished. Over the next few years, Knud declined every offer of help to find his missing wife. He even turned down several offers to buy the property outright. The motel fell into disrepair, and with Knud's death in 1997, it finally closed for good. Well, with her husband dead, most of the locals began to forget about Nellie. Well, that is, until she started reappearing. Soon after Knud's passing, drivers along the half-mile stretch of US 17 reported seeing a woman walking just off the side of the road. She was always near the Florida-Georgia line. She was always heading in the direction of the old Riverside Motel. It was always night, and she never seemed to take notice of the passing cars. The oddest part, because it obviously isn't odd enough already, if you pulled up or slowed down to talk to her, she would disappear. So, was this the ghost of Nellie VanZant Olford? Neighbors were convinced that it was. They claimed there was more to Knut's story than he had let on. Well, what was that story? First, Nellie wasn't his only wife. It turns out he had been married before, not once, but twice. His first wife was Wisconsin local Genevieve Piotrowski. That lasted for 12 years until he had her committed against her will to the Florida State Hospital, which was actually an asylum, in Chattahoochee. Once she was locked up, he divorced her in 1939 despite her protests. According to state records, Genevieve died in 1987 while still under care of the state. Her body was never claimed, and she was buried in the Potter's Field of Duval County's Hillside Cemetery. Well, his second marriage was to native Floridian Johnny May Richards in 1939. Now, if you double-check those dates, they were actually married before his divorce from Genevieve had even been finalized. This one lasted less than 3 years. Johnny May filed for divorce in 1942, citing desertion and extreme cruelty. The following year, he met Nellie. So what about dear departed Nellie? Her ghost had become something of a local mystery, but perhaps there was something more to her post-mortem fame, and it turns out there just might have been. On September 11, 1999, the Camden County Sheriff's Office was testing some new sonar equipment on the murky waters of the St. Mary's River. Well, just past the state line, they got an unexpected hit. Even more unexpected, the hit turned out to be Nellie's car at the bottom of the river. Nellie was still inside. Neighbors were quick to point out that that spot was where the ghostly woman always started her walk back towards the Riverside Motel. Well, after more than 6 years, Nellie's remains had spread across both the front and back seats of her 1990 Buick. What was left of her body also showed no indications as to the cause or nature of her death. One critical note, however, was the condition and placement of the car. Experts suggested that the car had not been in any kind of accident. In fact, the car seemed to have rolled into the water at a very slow or almost idling speed. Nellie, had she still been alive at that moment, should have had no trouble exiting the doomed Buick. Regardless of how she ended up in the St. Mary's River, the discovery of the car seemed to hold significance for Nellie's ghost. As soon as her body had been found, the ghost never appeared again. Let's move a few states north to South Carolina and back several years to 1790. That's when Eliza Huger was born to John and Anne Brown Huger of Charleston County. Now, it may not sound like much of a start, but this story ends with Eliza becoming a true local legend after death. According to this legend, and the facts are few and far between, Eliza grew up a beautiful girl with doting parents and 3 adoring brothers. As a young woman, she was quite taken with the finer things in life, and although her family came from means, her father kept a tight hand on the purse strings. In Eliza's opinion, she was often forced to go without. Oral histories suggest that if Papa wouldn't buy her the things she wanted, she would simply find someone else who would. If she wanted a new handkerchief or a pair of gloves, she'd sweet-talk some smitten farm boy. He'd empty his meager savings just to keep her happy. Once that well had run dry, she'd move on to another poor fool, and then another, and then another. Well, when Papa died, Eliza's fortunes grew worse. Her widowed mother didn't have the money for her daughter's lavish tastes. Plus, the local bachelors had had their fill of Eliza's empty promises of love. So, the young woman hatched a plan. Under the cover of night, Eliza left home and took a carriage, then the new train all the way to New Orleans. When her mother woke the next morning, she was in hysterics. She was certain her daughter had been spirited away in the night. Only Eliza's brother Daniel knew what she was up to, but she had sworn him to secrecy. About 5 years later, Daniel decided to track down his missing sister. He told his mother he was going to Savannah on business, But instead, he took that same train to the Louisiana Bayou. For 2 months, he searched for Eliza, finally ending up in the city of New Orleans. He eventually got a lead when a stranger claimed he had seen a beautiful girl that could be Eliza. The stranger didn't know the girl's name, though. He did know that she worked for Madame La Fontaine at one of the most notorious brothels in the French Quarter. Well, that's not great news, but Daniel forced his way into the brothel's grand salon. There he did find his Eliza in the arms of a drunken man. Although he begged her to come home, she refused. In as many words, she said she preferred the freedom of her new life. That's even worse news. Well, Daniel reacted like brothers usually do in sad tales like this one. He pulled out a pistol and shot Eliza through the heart. The police were called, but after a few bits of silver were traded, he was allowed to return home with Eliza's corpse. To make sure his mother never learned the sad truth, he arranged to have her buried far from home. This would also avoid any chance of a scandal. Eliza was buried in the graveyard at Old Stone Church in Clemson. There's a small wall around her grave, and it was planted with flowers. Daniel allegedly wrote her epitaph. A brother's sorrow dedicated, this marble to the memory of his sister, beneath it are the remains of Eliza Huger. Despite having a more colorful life than most, Eliza's story really takes off after her death. A few weeks past her funeral, the legend says that a dark storm rose over Old Stone Church. In a blinding crash, a bolt of lightning struck the cemetery just before midnight. The next morning, the only damage that could be found was to Eliza's grave. The slab covering it had been split in half, and the wall was in ruins. The stone was patched and the wall was rebuilt, and for a while that held. But then another storm struck her grave, then another, then another. Over time, locals whispered that this obviously was witchcraft. Stories soon popped up that leaving gifts at her gravesite would actually grant you wishes. And thus, Eliza was soon known as the Witch Queen of Clemson. So what was the truth behind this popular folktale? Now, typically for wealthy families like this, we have some history of the children, even those who died young. In this case, all we know about Eliza is that she died in 1819, leaving her mother, 3 brothers, and 2 half-siblings to grieve. Other than that, we have very little to work with. Now, today you can visit her grave at Old Stone Church. The marble covering is engraved just as the story says, and yes, it is split down the middle, whether by storm or other mishap, I don't know. The grave spotters seem to agree with the legend of Eliza Huger. Every time I visited, the slab has been covered with offerings of coins, keys, shells, and other trinkets. It's a fitting tribute for a notorious witch queen. The Mississippi town of Yazoo is home to tales of a different witch. According to the legend, she lived outside of town in relative anonymity. After death, however, she returned to burn the village to the ground. Now, this tale starts, allegedly, in May of 1884. The woman here in question has never been given a name by the authors. She was just known as the odd, cranky old woman who lived on the banks of the Yazoo River. And at this point in history, odd, cranky, and old probably meant that she was a witch. On a sunny afternoon in late May, a boy named Joe Bob Duggett was passing her shack on his raft. According to his account, he heard a bizarre groan from inside. When he peeked through a window, he got the scare of his young life. According to Joe Bob, the woman, who I will just refer to as the witch from here on out, was standing over the bodies of 2 dead men. She was waving her arms and singing in a language that made no sense to the boy. Well, as it turns out, Joe Bob possessed above-average survival instincts for someone caught up in a story like this, and he hightailed it out of there. He told the sheriff, and so they gathered a posse and went off to investigate. When they got to the shack, it was empty. No dead bodies and no witch. They did, however, find a pack of starving cats in the attic, and, probably more relevant to this story, 2 human skeletons suspended from the rafters. Well, just as they were about to leave, one of the sheriff's men heard a crunch of leaves out in back of the shack. There they found the old woman trying to make a stealthy getaway and apparently failing miserably at it. They tried the stop in the name of the law line, but it didn't work. She went racing off into the woods at a pace that frankly shocked them. They got themselves collected and went after her. When they finally caught up, she was chest deep in a patch of riverbed quicksand. Well, there's no record on whether or not they actually tried to save her, but if they did, it was their turn to fail miserably. According to their testimonies, just as her head was about to disappear beneath the sand, she got in a few choice final words. "I shall return," she swore. "In 20 years, I'll come back. I will break out of the grave and reduce Yazoo to smoking ashes." Once she was dead, then the posse figured out how to use a pitchfork and they fished her body out of the quicksand. The town voted and they decided to bury her in the middle of the cemetery. No idea why. To make sure she didn't come back, they even put the heaviest chain they could find around her grave. Well, it seemed to have worked for at least the first 20 years. The big morning came on May 25, 1904. A young lady named Miss Pauline Wise was planning her wedding. As she escorted a few visitors into her parlor, she found the room ablaze. The strong winds, which were very unusual for that time of year, spread the fire around the house, then to the next house, and then to the next, and so on. And in a very short time, the entirety of downtown Yazoo was a raging inferno. By the evening, most of the town's finer homes and almost every business, and that's a total of nearly 350 buildings over 28 city blocks, were reduced to smoldering embers. The next morning, the cemetery caretaker made another disturbing discovery. The thick iron chain around the witch's gravesite had been broken in two. So what was the line between truth and tall tale? Well, that's really up for debate. The Great Fire of 1904 is a well-documented disaster. Joe Bob Duggett's story of the sinking witch, that one is still a question. For his part, Joe Bob kept to his guns for the rest of his life, claiming the 1884 legend was nothing but fact. If you want to investigate for yourself, the old Yazoo Town Cemetery is now known as Glenwood Cemetery, and near the center you can find a broken stone slab from the 1990s. It's got an epitaph thanking the previous caretaker and mentioning the Yazoo Witch. Yes, the heavy chain around the grave is most certainly broken. And according to local historians, the current slab replaced an earlier broken one that simply read two initials, T.W. This next short tale is from Alabama, and it was popularized by folklorist Catherine Tucker Windham in her book 13 Alabama Ghosts and Jeffrey. That entire series of books is phenomenal, and I urge you to track down a copy for each state. According to the legend, the ghost now known as the Red Lady of Huntingdon College started off as Margaret Transom. Although born and raised in New York, her father sent her off to her grandmother's alma mater in Montgomery. When she arrived at Alabama Women's College, which is now Huntingdon College, she didn't really seem to fit in. She was, by all accounts, a big city girl in what she saw as a backwards southern state. She also had her affectations, like a love for anything and everything red: clothes, furnishings, trinkets, and so on. After a series of roommates that came and went, Margaret found herself alone in her room on the 4th floor of Old Pratt Hall. Now, according to local lore, she would wander the halls at night, dressed all in red, of course, basically just freaking out the other students. After several disastrous months, the school was preparing for the Christmas break. There was a big holiday farewell party, and all of the students attended, well, all of them but one. As the party ended, a hall mother went in search of Margaret. She found her dead in her room, her wrists slit with a razor. By the end of the holiday vacation, most of the students had forgotten about the missing Margaret. But it turns out she hadn't quite left. Residents began to report an odd glow that traveled the length of Old Pratt Hall. Sometimes it just slipped away from view. Other times it built into a crimson flash just at Margaret's former door. And over the years, students learned that after dark, they should avoid the hall and the Red Lady of Huntingdon College. Well, the hall was demolished in 2004, but that hasn't dimmed Margaret's legacy. Every year, the campus celebrates Fright Week in October. It's a chance to acknowledge the darker side of the school's history. And one of the premier events, the Red Lady Run, which now has become an annual tradition. This last tale is one of my favorite Southern Gothic ghost stories. In the legend of the Greenbrier ghost, the haunt doesn't return just seeking revenge, she is looking for a little earthly justice. This story begins in October of 1896 when Elva, Zona, Heaster met a blacksmith named Edward or Erasmus Stribling Trout Shoe. Although they were engaged within a month or two, Zona's mother, Mary J. Heaster, was against the match from the start. While it's true that many mothers feel that their soon-to-be son-in-laws aren't good enough for their daughters, in this case Mary was dead on target. It turns out that Edward had a few secrets. First, he had a criminal record. He had served time in the state pen for stealing a horse. Second, in shades of Nellie Olford, Zona's new husband had been married twice before. The first marriage ended when the wife divorced him for cruelty and desertion. The second wife died when Edward accidentally dropped a brick on her head while he was making repairs to the roof of their home. Mary did what she could to protest, but the couple eloped anyway. It turns out that Mary was a better judge of character than her daughter. Within 3 months of Zona and Edward's first meeting, she was found dead in their home. The local physician, Dr. George W. Knapp, was unable to resuscitate her. Her husband claimed she died of natural causes, and he requested no further examination of the body. For whatever reason, Knapp agreed. Edward was even the one to dress Zona's body for burial, including a high-collared dress and a large veil that was folded over several times and tied in an exaggerated bow underneath her chin. Over the coming week, Mary Heaster began to tell a spectacular tale. She claimed that her daughter's ghost visited her every night. Although the spirit couldn't talk, Zona made one thing very clear. She had been murdered. She even showed her mother the bruises around her neck. Mary spent every waking moment telling the tale to anyone who would listen. Well, she finally found an audience in an important place with local prosecutor John Alfred Preston. Official records don't say whether or not he believed her tale about Zona's ghost. They do say, however, that he ultimately agreed to reopen the case. He spoke to Dr. Knapp, who admitted he had done virtually no examination of Zona's body. That, John Alfred Preston suggested, demanded an exhumation, and they did. When Knapp conducted a full exam of the corpse, he found what Mary had promised all along. Beneath the collar and the knotted veil, Zona's neck was covered in bruises and finger marks. Her windpipe had been crushed and her neck had been broken. Edward was arrested and charged with murder. His trial began on June 22, 1897, and Mary was the star witness. The court records show that Mary's claim of seeing Zona's ghost was brought up by the defense, but that seemed to have backfired. It may actually have been that the locals believed her shocking tale. The jury found him guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison, and they recommended no mercy. On a side note, Edward escaped death at the hands of a lynch mob that formed soon after his conviction. Even so, he didn't last much longer than that. He died on March 13, 1900, in West Virginia's state pen in Moundsville as one victim of a regional epidemic. He is buried somewhere in the local cemetery in an unmarked grave. According to Mary, after the trial, Zona's ghost never appeared to her again. Whether it was a spirit, a figment of a mother's imagination, or just a shrewd ploy by Mary to find justice for her daughter, the specter's work seemed to be done. So who are your favorite Southern ghosts? Which women from history deserve to have their stories, and that's both before and after death, told for new generations? Drop me a comment and I'll add them to a future episode. Next up on Haunts and Hollows True Tales of the Gothic South, I will tell you the tale of William Seymour Keener, the first man legally hanged in Rabun County, Georgia, and the shocking crime that led to his execution. It's a tale that would have been lost to time had it not been for one intrepid reporter more than 1,000 miles away. Want more folk legends and true tales from the Gothic South? I invite you to subscribe to this podcast. You'll get a new episode every other week, and in each we will uncover the places, the people, the customs, and the stories that lurk in the shadowed history of the South. You can also check out my latest book, Florida Coast, for a guided road trip of more than 80 of the darkest, most shadowed spots in the Sunshine State. If you want to see me in person, visit me online at hauntsandhollows.com for a list of new releases and a schedule of cons and events that I attend all around the South. Until then, safe travels.